Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Disgraced Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein is reportedly planning to flee the country for France, taking a cue from his longtime friend, director and fugitive child rapist Roman Polanski. Weinstein's friends in the movie business and in progressive politics pretend to be stunned and aghast at all of this. This isn't the Harvey Weinstein we knew, they claim in anguished interviews arranged by their publicists. We're appalled. Right. Except it's exactly the Harvey Weinstein they knew, the same one that Seth MacFarlane joked about at the Academy Award nominee announcements.
Congratulations, you five ladies no longer have to pretend to be attracted to Harvey Weinstein.
When they mock your lechery from the stage of one of the highest rated shows on television, it's not a secret, and indeed it wasn't. MacFarlane now says he heard about Weinstein's harassment from one of his many victims at the time. MacFarlane knew, so did everyone else. They're all lying about it. Who specifically is lying? Here's a partial list. Pretty much every A-list actor who once worked for Harvey Weinstein. Most of them are now saying how shocked they are. Please. They all knew. A couple of them called the New York Times in 2004 on Weinstein's behalf to stop an expose on his sexual harassment. They didn't know the truth then? Come on, of course they did. That's why they killed the story. NBC News. They had this story months ago, but they didn't run it. Ronan Farrow, a former MSNBC anchor, originally did the investigation for NBC News, but they refused to air it. So he took it to the New Yorker magazine, which published the blockbuster yesterday. NBC News president Noah Oppenheim now says Farrow just didn't have it nailed down. That's absurd. Farrow had videotaped testimony from 8 separate women, according to the Daily Beast, plus the New York Police Department audio tape of Harvey Weinstein confessing. If that's not a solid news story, nothing is. And yet NBC cravenly caved to pressure and killed the piece. They ought to be ashamed. Keep in mind, this is the same company that secretly gave the Billy Bush Access Hollywood tape to the Washington Post during the last campaign, almost a year ago. They're a political shop, not a news organization. They ought to stop pretending otherwise. And then there's Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance. He clearly had enough evidence years ago to prosecute Harvey Weinstein for groping a model, including that videotape confession. Instead, he let Weinstein go. Shortly after, Harvey Weinstein's lawyer sent Cy Vance a $10,000 donation. Coincidence? Right. And what about Tina Brown? In the late 1990s, Brown left the New Yorker magazine to partner with Weinstein on a magazine called Talk. Brown conceded yesterday there were whispers about Weinstein's behavior. She admits she saw Weinstein routinely give favorable treatment to beautiful women he was cultivating. She saw him quash negative articles about himself by leaking information about other stars. Yet despite all of that, Brown tells us, nobody really knew for sure. Oh, come on. I worked for Talk magazine at the time. Trust me, Tina Brown knew. She was Weinstein's business partner for 2 years and a famously perceptive person. And yet until now, she's never mentioned any of it. And it's not like she hasn't had the chance. For the past 7 years, Tina Brown has run the Women in the World Summit, which brings together socially conscious feminists like Hillary Clinton and Meryl Streep to discuss the challenges women face worldwide. A single word from Brown at any of these conferences might have saved a lot of women a lot of pain at the hands of Harvey Weinstein. But Tina Brown didn't say a word, nor did Hillary Clinton nor Meryl Streep, both longtime friends of Harvey Weinstein's. We could go on and on. Hollywood protected and legitimized Harvey Weinstein with the active help of Democratic Party luminaries like Barack and Michelle Obama. But Weinstein isn't the only predator who has found a welcome home in the movie business. In 1988, film director Victor Salva molested a 12-year-old boy who was acting in a film he was working on. We can be sure this happened because Salva videotaped the crime. Salva was charged, convicted, and served time in prison. Then he went back to work in Hollywood. Walt Disney Studios, the same company that gave you The Lion King and Frozen, hired Salva to direct the film Powder in 1995. Since then, Salva has made several other movies, including the Jeepers Creepers horror franchise. He's also a member in good standing of the Directors Guild of America, whose top officers include left-wing directors Jon Favreau and Ron Howard. By all accounts, nobody in the movie business judges him, and they don't. Hollywood is corrupt. The powerful prey upon the weak, and nobody is held accountable. That's the lesson of the Harvey Weinstein saga. It's a world the police don't touch. It's a world that's unwilling to police itself. It's far past time for the federal government to step in here to protect the vulnerable, and there are many of them. Weinstein and his enablers intimidated the New York Times, NBC News, the Manhattan District Attorney. They're unlikely to be as effective with the Justice Department. Harvey Levin is the founder of TMZ, also hosts Objectified on Sundays at 8 p.m. right here on Fox. We're proud to have him. He has the very latest on this story and has from day one. Harvey, what is the latest?
Well, the latest is pretty shocking that Harvey Weinstein's daughter called 911 at about 11 this morning and reported that her dad was suicidal and depressed. And there was a major argument that went down outside of her home. Weinstein was there. They took it into the street. He was screaming at his daughter, "You're making it worse." He tried flagging down a random car to get away, didn't get in the car. They went back in the house. Harvey came back out, jumped in a black Suburban. Before the police arrived, they came roaring over because of the 911 call. And at that point, Remy, the daughter, told police, well, it wasn't really a suicide attempt. It was just a family dispute. So she backed off what she had called about. But, you know, obviously, you know, this is a guy whose world collapsed. You know, his wife left him. He lost his job. He is now the subject of scorn and ridicule all over the world. So it seems like it's taken its toll.
So I thought he had left the country, was planning to go to rehab in France. That was the announcement. Is that still going to happen?
Well, we didn't say France. We broke the story that the plan yesterday was for him to take a plane out last night and go to Europe. We don't know where in Europe, but we said Europe. It could have been France. It could have been somewhere else. It changed. He did not go last night. I don't want to say what I know right now, but I will tell you that I wouldn't necessarily bet money that Harvey Weinstein is leaving the country.
Right.
And that story will develop over the next
So we're hearing,
hours.
and I don't know if you can comment on this, that he's the subject of a federal investigation, FBI investigation. Could that be related to what you just said?
Yeah, look, I have heard this, Tucker. It seems insane to me. I can't believe that's the case. I mean, this is not a federal crime. If there is a crime, he hasn't been charged with anything yet. So I know the story. It seems outlandish to me that the federal government would launch an abstract investigation where there's no criminal investigation that we even know of, thinking that he's going to flee the country. First of all, he's allowed to leave the country because there hasn't been a crime alleged yet. So it doesn't make any sense.
Well, there are plenty of
he can go
crimes
anywhere
alleged.
he wants to go.
I mean, he's been accused
Well, he
of
can go
rape
anywhere
by
he
a
wants to
number
go.
of women. That's true.
He can go anywhere he wants to go. So what's the Justice Department investigating?
Right. So
what are they investigating?
I mean, well, he's been accused by a number of women of rape, so that.
Well,
you know,
but
that
they haven't even filed civil lawsuits. But if they do,
that's right. That's true.
But still, even if they do, that's still not any basis for the Justice Department to get involved. Right. You know, he can go to Europe and stay there forever, and what's going to happen if there's a civil lawsuit is there'll be a default judgment. But it makes this story makes no sense, and that's why I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
So the question is, I think at this stage, who knew what when? You've been there an awful long time. Is it fair to say, can you corroborate what I'm hearing from friends of mine in Los Angeles, that this was stuff that people talked about? Maybe not with the level of detail we have, but that this is not a shock, really.
I think that's exactly right. That that there have been rumblings of this for a long, long time, many, many years. And you know, I have heard it. I never heard specifics. I never heard a specific name attached. But it was just kind of lore in the city and talked about by people, some of whom worked for the company and left. I know some of them, and they talked. But I never knew the level of specificity that we're hearing now. I do know, and I think you've heard it as well, obviously, you know, for example, Sharon Waxman, who was working at the New York Times in 2004, actually wrote a story about him allegedly procuring women outside the country. And according to her, in 2004, Weinstein went to the New York Times and they ultimately gutted the article. So that's what she says. You know, people talked about it. There were definitely people looking into it, but nothing was ever reported.
Yeah. Harvey Levin, thanks a lot for joining us.
Okay,
welcome to Fox.
Thank you.
This case has exploded. It's big, and there are many new developments. For the latest in this story, we go to our own Trace Gallagher, who's been following it. Trace?
Hi, Tucker. For the moment, Harvey Weinstein, as you said, isn't facing any criminal charges, though the film producer may be anticipating a change in that status because he has now hired a high-profile criminal attorney. And today, embattled Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance defended his office's decision not to prosecute Harvey Weinstein, despite having an audio tape where Weinstein appeared to admit assaulting a young model in 2015. Watch.
I understand that folks are outraged by his behavior. I understand that there are many other allegations that have surfaced, but in our case, we really did what I think the law obligates us to do.
Vance's office also is taking fire for accepting a $10,000 donation from David Boies, an attorney for Harvey Weinstein. The donation came in 2015, just months after the office decided not to press charges. And despite a flurry of actresses making accusations against Weinstein, on Tuesday, Lindsay Lohan went on Instagram to defend him. Watch this.
I feel very bad for Harvey Weinstein right now. I don't think it's right what's going on. I think Georgina needs to take a stand and be there for her husband.
Lohan quickly took down the video, but apparently her support for Weinstein still stands. And we are also hearing from Harvey Weinstein himself tonight, telling Us Weekly that he sat down with his wife and discussed what was best for their family, saying, quoting here, "In the end, she made the decision to separate. I understand. I love her and I love our children. And hopefully when I'm better, I will be in their lives again." And now the Motion Picture Academy, which has already called the allegations against Weinstein abhorrent, will meet this weekend to discuss whether to strip his membership so Weinstein could be out, though admitted pedophile Roman Polanski would still be in. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher. Thanks, Trace. You want to know what corruption looks like? You're watching it. This is corruption. From NBC to Hillary Clinton, countless people seem determined to protect Harvey Weinstein from the consequences of his behavior. Why exactly is that? Mark Stein is here to tell us next. Also, we'll give you the latest on the Las Vegas shooting. Things are getting weirder and more confusing in this investigation, and we have the very latest on it. Stay tuned. All right, so we were just talking with Harvey about whether the FBI has opened an investigation into Harvey Weinstein's behavior, something we called for on this show last night. The Daily Mail is just reporting, I think just right now reporting, that the FBI has opened an investigation into Weinstein for alleged sex crimes. So that's the latest, according to the Daily Mail as of right now. The New York Times, of course, knew about Harvey Weinstein's behavior more than a decade ago. They did nothing. They killed the story. NBC did the same thing. They had the story in their hands, written by Ronan Farrow, nailed down completely. They killed it anyway. Countless actors were silent. Even Hillary Clinton took 5 days to comment. She's close friends with Weinstein, says she's a champion of women around the world, but didn't stand up for them in this case, and neither did the Obamas. It's a theme on the left. They haven't stood up for women in this case. Why is that? Mark Stein is an author and a columnist, and he joins us right now. So, Mark, I mean, let's note the obvious paradox. This is the home of women. This is the party that wages war on their behalf when the Republican Party wages war on them, and yet actual women were being abused by this guy, and they enabled it and protected him. What's going on?
Well, there's actually one anecdote, one vignette in Ronan Farrow's New Yorker piece that sums up not just Hollywood, but I think the Democrat Party, the Clinton Democrats' attitude to all this. Harvey Weinstein is at the Cannes Film Festival, and he runs into Emma Decaune, a French actress. I was actually on telly with her dad about 1,000 years ago. And he asks Emma Decaune to lunch. And at lunch, he tells her that he's just optioned this book, and it's got a strong, independent woman role in it that she'd be perfect for. And she says, "What's the name of the book?" He says, "I can't remember the name, but it's up in my room. Why don't you come up and I'll give it to you?" So they go up to his hotel room. He steps into the bathroom. He emerges from the bathroom entirely naked in what I'll discreetly call a priapic state. And that's progressive values in Hollywood in a nutshell. Oh, I'm totally committed to more roles for fierce, strong, independent women, and I'll consider giving one to you if you come up to my room and sexually service me. That is actually the Harvey Weinstein story, and to a certain extent, that is also the Clinton Democrat story too.
Well, it's literally the Bill Clinton story. It's literally so.
That's right.
What is this psychological transference? Is the people who are committing the crime accusing their opponents of being guilty of the offense because it's somehow a way of expiating their guilt? I mean, why is it that people always accuse, the left always accuses its opponents of doing the exact same thing they're guilty of? Have you noticed this?
Yeah, well, I think it's actually worse than that, because if you notice the things that the left gets annoyed, if Mitt Romney, who is nobody's idea of a sex fiend, and he happens to say that as encouraging women to apply for a job, he phrases it rather clumsily, and he says binders full of women. All these late-night talk show hosts, everyone, he's a punchline for 2 weeks afterwards. Dear old decent Mitt, because he's a stiff who stands up when a woman enters the room and holds the door for her as she leaves. Meanwhile, they're completely heartless about the huge mountain of human debris piled up by this Hollywood pig over the last 3 decades, and I think it goes to the fact that they're actually willing. It's the old line about communism: you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. Right. And in this case, Harvey Weinstein's the guy who made Shakespeare in Love, and if he were talking to Shakespeare, he'd say you can't make a Hamlet without breaking a few chicks. This is the necessary collateral damage.
No, this is
the necessary collateral damage, as they see it.
They love humanity but mistreat people. It's always in the abstract. So you are seeing, even now, we could not get anybody from Los Angeles, and I know a lot of people out there, to come on and talk about this. You got to kind of wonder, at what point does Hollywood come clean and admit that Harvey Weinstein is not an aberration? He's not, I mean, he may have been the most piggish guy you've ever heard of, but he's not an anomaly out there. I mean, do we ever get to kind of reform that culture?
Well, I think that's very interesting. I mean, Harvey Levin was saying a couple of minutes ago that there's no actual crime here yet for the FBI to investigate.
Just rape allegations, no big deal. Yeah.
Well, but there are certain other oddities here. For example, the Miramax head guy in Italy was a guy who knew nothing about movies and was paid $400 grand a year to procure broads for Harvey Weinstein. That's ultimately, I don't know whether that business expense went to the revenue agency in Italy or here in the United States under the parent company Disney, but that's certainly something to investigate. If you look at the way the Weinstein Company ran, he had a modus operandi. It would be a female staffer who would call up the young actress and invite them to a meeting, and the actress would think, oh, it's okay, because I'm not going to be alone with Harvey Weinstein. There's going to be this other woman in the room. And after 10 minutes, the female employee would withdraw from the room, leaving the actress there to be attacked, physically attacked, by Weinstein. That's systemic corruption in the Weinstein Company. That's right. And that's why it isn't just one man. There is something to investigate. That's what's corrupting about it, and that's what ties it to the Democrats. Because just as Hillary was an enabler who ran fraudulently as a feminist, so these enablers in the Weinstein Company present themselves as a progressive feminist organization.
Exactly. I'm coming to the conclusion that feminism isn't sincere. Just throwing that out there. Mark Stein, great to see you tonight.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
10 days of investigation have only made the Las Vegas shooting more confusing. New revelations raise questions about why police took so long to locate the shooter and if they know what they're doing in the investigation. That's not an overstatement. Stay tuned for the latest details on that. Las Vegas shooting was an unusual story from the beginning, bizarre in some ways. But 10 days into the investigation, things are getting stranger, if anything, more baffling. Initial accounts and the timelines for the shootings have been replaced. A new timeline featured on the Today Show indicates police could have identified Stephen Paddock's location far earlier than they actually did. Watch.
This is the sound of the actual first shot Stephen Paddock fired from his Las Vegas hotel room.
Call the police. Someone's firing a gun up here. Someone's firing a rifle on the 32nd floor down the hallway.
According to a revised police timeline, that was 9:59. Paddock began firing at the crowd outside at 10:05, then stopped at 10:15. A police SWAT team got to the 32nd floor at 10:17, and a minute later learned that the guard was shot and where the shots came from. That means it took Las Vegas police 19 minutes to find out what the guard and the engineer already knew, where a man was firing a gun on the 32nd floor.
Well, today, hotel engineer Stephen Schuck spoke again about the attack and why the police were so slow to react to it, apparently.
As soon as I started to go to a door to my left, the rounds started coming down the hallway. I could feel them pass right behind my head. Something hit me in the back, and I took cover. I tried to think how I could get to Jesus because I could see that he was shot in the leg. So I called over the radio what was going on. As soon as the shooting stopped, we made our way down the hallway and took cover again. I told myself, you know, remain calm. If I freak out right now, it's only going to get me killed or injured.
And then, despite one of the biggest police investigations in the history of Las Vegas, somehow Paddock's home was broken into. His house in Reno was broken into by someone. We don't know why. We don't know what they took, if anything. Chris Kudialis writes for the Las Vegas Sun. Ted Williams is an attorney and former D.C. homicide detective, and they both join us. Ted, to you first. This timeline doesn't seem to make any sense at all.
It doesn't make any sense, Tucker. It's weird and bizarre, and you've got to wonder what is law enforcement saying to the public out here. They gave us this initial timeline that Campos was shot during the course of the actual shooting into the crowd.
He's the security guard.
He is the security guard.
But let me just ask, why would he be at Paddock's door in the first place? This was before any shooting took place.
What had happened, Tucker, is that an alarm had went off up there. He's a security guard for the hotel, so he went up to check the alarm. The Paddock had all of these cameras he had in place, saw him coming, shot 200 times through a door, and hit him in the leg with one of the some shrapnel.
And then waited 6 minutes, opened fire, and it was more than an hour before police made it into the room. Chris, that account, that timeline, which is the revised version, is now being apparently contested by the hotel, which says that's wrong. Am I getting that correct?
Correct. MGM, Tucker, has said that they don't necessarily agree completely with the timeline that police have provided. So I think this is the first time throughout the 10-day investigation that MGM and police haven't, at least publicly, seen eye to eye on this timeline.
But why have the authorities, why the investigators so radically changed the sequence of events, the timeline? Why did they do that?
That's a great question. Metropolitan Police here in Las Vegas has really made an effort over the past 5 years to really become as transparent as possible for the media and for the public. So that includes updating daily, as we've seen throughout this investigation for the most part, showing body cam video, and they've really tried to show the public everything that they know as soon as they know it. And a lot of times you see authorities as well can get things mixed up, and it's you know, now in the face of the public, a lot of people scratching their heads on what's going on.
Yeah, this is not a small thing, though. I mean, these are the core facts of the case, and it's very confusing to me. Here's what we know, though. Apparently, Paddock's home, Ted, in Reno, was broken into. This is part of an active homicide investigation. You were a homicide investigator. How could you leave the home of the suspect unsecured a week after the crime?
You know, Tucker, this was evidence. As you know, they've served 2 search warrants on Paddock's homes. You would have think that all of his homes would have continued to be secure. The sad commentary, and we need to admit it, this was Keystone Cop. When I say Keystone Cop, that place should have been secure. It was not, unfortunately.
Well, Chris, I think part of the problem, I mean, the shooter apparently is dead. I mean, we're assuming there was just one shooter. But this shakes the public's faith in anything the investigators say. Again, have they given any indication of what new information they found that caused them to totally rearrange their understanding of what happened?
Really, they haven't. In terms of speaking to the media, they haven't been offered they haven't really offered any new information as to why the timeline shifted. Sheriff Joe Lombardo really kind of staying tight-lipped, if you will, with regards to what happened, why the timeline shifted, other than the fact that the timeline has shifted and that Jesus Campos, the security guard, was found 6 minutes, or he'd been shot 6 minutes before Stephen Paddock opened fire on the crowd. That's all we know at this point, compared to what we were told earlier in the investigation, that he had come in towards the end of the firing and was credited for stopping Paddock firing at the crowd.
Which at least made sense. I mean, there was still a gap between the shooting of Campos and the moment when police found the body, but still, this does not make sense. So, given this fact set, Ted, without speculating too much, what's the likely explanation from what we know, or is there even one?
Look, Tucker, you and I are going to be here next year, and I can unequivocally tell you, I don't think we are going to find the motive behind this killer. He's dead. We thought we were going to find it through Mary Lou Dantley, his girlfriend. We haven't found it there. His brother, Eric. So we're stuck with a madman doing horrible things. And this is part of the frustration, by the way, of law enforcement, that they cannot find the motive behind this. Law enforcement is always looking for a motive, and they can't, unfortunately.
I would settle for the facts, actually, at this point. Can't get those either. Ted and Chris, thank you both very much. Las Vegas has the headline. Chicago, though, has the body count as always. That city has surpassed 500 murders just this year. We'll talk to an alderman from the city of Chicago who says, of course, gun control is the answer. Stay tuned for that. The Las Vegas massacre understandably getting a lot of attention now, but there's another massacre happening in slow motion, has been for years in the city of Chicago, and other cities, by the way. But Chicago recently recorded its 500th gun homicide for the year. By the end of this year, it will have enough fatal shootings to match Stephen Paddock's murder spree at least 10 times over. George Cardenas is a Chicago alderman. He's upset about this, understandably. He says tough gun laws could help the situation. Alderman Cardenas joins us tonight. Mr. Cardenas, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tucker. Thanks for the invite.
So I've done this story. I know you're sincerely concerned about this, and I appreciate that. And I've done this story a million times, and it's always the same answer, which is we need better gun control in the city of Chicago because we have Indiana right next door. And I always think, well, you know, I live in D.C., which has a much lower murder rate than Chicago. I live like 800 yards from Virginia, which has lax gun laws. Why is Chicago different?
Well, I mean, it's different for a lot of different reasons. And, you know, obviously guns are part of the problem, but it isn't the only problem. You have a community and beset by unemployment, by lack of opportunities. And by the way, most of the homicides and violence are affected in African-American communities, some Hispanics, but blacks are really impacted by the gun violence. When you have had this investment and you cut schools, and you cut school funding, and for decades, by the way, the areas of the South Side and the West Sides have been left with neglect. Jobs have left. All the manufacturing jobs that were there decades ago are long gone. Nothing has replaced that. You add that to the mix of everything happening in the city of Chicago, and along with cases, obviously, of police brutality, allegations of.
Wait, but I wonder, okay, I mean, look, I'm not discounting any of that. You know, most of what you said is real, except the school funding thing, which is silly. But the rest of it is real. There is a job crisis there, but there's a job crisis in a lot of parts of the country, de-industrial parts of the country that don't have the same murder rate. Maine or Appalachia, there are lots of places that have similar problems but don't have the murder rate that you guys have. Why does nobody ever mention? Why does nobody ever mention the fact that the majority of kids in Chicago don't have a father at home? Do you think that's a part of it?
Well, that's part of it. If you have a lack of job opportunities, if you have lack of you know, infrastructure where
the family part of it. I know the job stuff.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But why does nobody ever mention that? Why are politicians so afraid?
We mention it. We acknowledge it.
No, you don't. No, you never do. That's not true.
Yeah, there's a lot of programs here in place in this city.
I'm not talking about programs. I'm not talking about programs.
Become a father.
Look, you know the truth, and I'm not. I know you're smart. I'm not patronizing you, but I'm being sincere. If you don't have a dad at home, you can grow up to be a great person, but and most do. But it's a lot harder, and you're much more likely to have violence in your neighborhood if nobody has a dad. Well, why does nobody have
Tucker,
the courage to say that?
Let's talk about the numbers. Let's talk about the numbers.
Yeah.
So here, let's talk about the numbers. So in Illinois, you have approximately 49,000 prison inmates. 65% of those prison inmates happen to be African American. Right. Now, as a percentage of the population in Illinois, they're only 14% of the population. So, you know, what's going on? Why is so many African Americans incarcerated? Not to mention, not just African Americans, Hispanics as well, but those statistics tell you if they're not, if obviously they're in prison, they can be at home providing for their families, right? So you're saying those statistics, yes, of course, you're going to see a big gap in that. It's a social problem that we have. So I need you to understand that, because we're actually why isn't the father home?
Social problems are complex, as you know, and I don't want to reduce it just to one factor, because that's not fair. But that's a huge factor. The family you grow up in shapes a lot of who you are. And it did for you, it did for me. And if you have a community where, like, nobody in the neighborhood is a dad at home, maybe that's a massive part of it. And politicians, particularly on the left, are so afraid to say that out loud because it sounds mean, or because they're courting single women as a voting bloc, which you are, I know. Why don't they get over their political fear and tell
Tucker,
the truth about that?
You want to solve the problem, don't you? I mean, no, forget about Republican, Democrat. You like to solve the problem, don't you?
Yes.
I mean, this is a big city. It affects the United States.
Yes,
it
I
affects
agree.
America.
And I don't think that's the only
There's a lot of Republicans
factor
here in Illinois.
Right?
I'm just saying that if you take the data of African Americans being incarcerated at 10 times the rate of everybody else, if they're in prison, they can't be at home providing for their family, right?
I think that's part of it, but wouldn't it be helpful just to name the problem and stop patronizing us with this nonsense about Indiana being responsible because they have different gun laws? Like, that's just dumb, and everybody knows it, right?
Well, look, I'm not.
You didn't say it, but everybody says that.
What I'm saying here is that guns are also part of the problem, because, you know, guns are cheaper than buying an iPhone. I mean, that's crazy. $100 to buy a gun, and when you have an area in the city of Chicago, a community beset by violence, beset by unemployment, beset by a lot of also socioeconomic problems, that's just fuel to the fire. That's what I'm saying.
But it's not the cause.
Problem, no
Those
doubt
are tools. Yeah, I get it. But,
right. We got to come to solutions.
George, thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. We thought Boy Scouts were for boys. It's in the name. No longer. Boy Scouts just announced it will be admitting girls. We'll talk to an Eagle Scout about the change and what it means for America, because it does mean something. Something important has ended. What's next? Stay tuned. For more than 100 years, the Boy Scouts of America have been teaching boys to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, and all the other bits of the Scout law. So, of course, the left has always hated them. But now the Boy Scouts are ditching the first half of their name for the sake of gender equality. The Boy Scouts announced today that girls will be allowed to join the Cub Scouts. They'll also be creating a parallel organization for older girls who will let them attain the rank of Eagle Scout. Whatever happened to the Girl Scouts? Whatever. Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA, he is an Eagle Scout, and he joins us tonight. Charlie, the reason I want to talk to you was this felt like the end of something and the beginning of something new. And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it struck me as kind of a big deal. What does it mean, do you think?
I think you're spot on. I think it is a continuation of the left's persistent attack on successful institutions in this country. Look, the Boy Scouts of America have been one of the most proven institutions to turn boys into men. And that means, in essence, to a developed and proven curriculum of having involvement in the community, leadership development, and so forth. For over 100 years, the Boy Scouts of America have had presidents, CEOs, so on and so forth. But this is consistent with what the academics are teaching the next generation that genders are nothing more than a social construct. They don't mean anything, that gender and sex are not related at all. And you and I both know that actually there's a good argument to be made, if not truth behind the fact that boys are better at some things than girls, and girls are better at some things than boys. But the worst part about this is, what does it do to the Girl Scouts? I mean, the Girl Scouts, they're also a 100-plus year organization. They were founded two years after the Boy Scouts of America. What does this do to the Girl Scouts of America? They released a statement really condemning this. And so, as an Eagle Scout, I'm disgusted and I'm disappointed to see this.
But even before the current gender battles, which are obviously part of this, the left disliked the Boy Scouts, and I always thought it was because the Boy Scouts are the two things they hate. They're wholesome and they're non-ironic. It's the same reason the left always hates the Mormons. There's no ironic inflection. They're just sincere. Why does that drive liberals so crazy?
Well, it also goes to show why they're supporting these national anthem protests. They hate patriotism. And there's no group more than the Boy Scouts that have defended the flag or have engendered or fostered patriotism amongst our youth. And one of the key components of being a Boy Scout is understanding the flag code and being involved in your local community and understanding what it means to actually serve your country. But what the left is trying to accomplish is a deconstruction of traditional values. And this goes back to the 1920s and 30s, and this is what the Marxists have been so effective in doing in overtaking our universities. And this is just another attack on a fundamental institution that has proven to be successful over the last 100 years, from turning boys into men. And men do matter, but the left does not think so.
I absolutely agree with that. I don't think this, I will be mocked for this, but it's not a small thing. There's something bigger. Charlie Kirk, thanks a lot for helping explain that.
Thank you, Tug.
Up next, the nuclear deal with Iran could be gone. It could be decertified in just a matter of hours, tomorrow or Friday. Is that good or bad? What does it mean? We'll talk to Sam Faddis, a longtime CIA officer who's worked in that region for decades. He joins us in a minute. President Trump spoke with Sean Hannity today. During that interview, the president blasted the Iranian nuclear deal as a work of utter incompetence by the previous administration. Watch.
I think it was one of the most incompetently drawn deals I've ever seen. $150 billion given. We got nothing. We got nothing. They got a path to nuclear weapons very quickly. And think of this one, $1.7 billion in cash. This is cash out of your pocket. What? You know how many airplane loads that must be? Did you ever see $1 million like a promotion where they have $1 million in $100 bills? It's a lot of. This is $1.7 billion. You'd almost say, who would be authorized to do it? And who are the people that deliver it? You may never see them again, right? But,
plane loads.
But just plane loads. So this is the worst deal. We got nothing. We got nothing.
That full interview airs in just a few minutes on Hannity right after the show. Given what the president just said about the nuclear deal, it's no surprise it could be gone soon, maybe in just a few hours, tomorrow or Friday. Reports indicate the president could decertify it in that time. Would that be the right move? What would be the result of that? Sam Faddis is a longtime CIA operations officer, very familiar with that region, and he joins us tonight. Sam, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
I think the overwhelming majority of our viewers probably agree with the president that the deal was feckless, badly negotiated. I think most people agree with that.
Right.
What does it mean to decertify it, to pull out from it?
What it means if they decertify it is now the Congress will have the option to reimpose sanctions, U.S. sanctions. That's basically what it means.
There's a concern among some people in Washington that there are forces in the foreign policy establishment pushing the U.S. toward an armed conflict with Iran. Do you share that concern?
I do share that concern. I mean, I agree 100% that the deal should be scrapped.
Yes.
We should walk away. Yeah, it's a disaster. Now will be the really difficult part, what we do, how we navigate this territory. And we do not want to be careless. This is a time for really sober judgment.
What would it mean to be careless? How could this go wrong after decertification?
Well, we have allowed the Iranians out of the box, not just in regard to the Iranian nuclear deal, but across the entire Middle East. We're going to have to push back. We're going to have to get them contained again. There are going to be a million opportunities for that to go wrong, for us to end up exchanging fire with them or end up being dragged into a conflict with them. So this is not a time for hotheads and people that are all eager to start exchanging fire.
What would a war with Iran look like?
It would be a mess. I mean, this This is not a bunch of guys that you can drop a couple of bombs on in a cave, right? This is a major military power with a Navy and Air Force, with ballistic missiles, with allies all over the Middle East. And by the way, allies all over the world. I mean, through Hezbollah, they have the capacity to strike anywhere on the planet.
And of course, they're a major ally of Russia.
Absolutely. Right. And by this point, other people are even being dragged into this. I am unclear as to where the Turks are right now. Used to be firmly in NATO's camp. Now, apparently, sliding toward the Iranians.
So there's this idea finally that you could delay the advancement of the Iran nuclear program by air, by lobbing in ordnance. Is that realistic?
You know, the first thing I always think when somebody says that is you better know where everything is, right? That presupposes some really superb intelligence. As a guy who worked that for a long time, I'm not confident that you can do that.
Are you confident that we have superb intelligence from the region?
No, I'm not confident that we have superb intelligence. I bet our intelligence on the Iranian nuclear effort is mediocre at best, to be honest.
Coming from someone who gathered intelligence for a long time, not reassuring. Sam Faddis, thank you for joining us and for that perspective.
Thank you.